Welcome, everyone. I'm Nicholas Berggruen. We are lucky in many ways. One, we are lucky that you're all here and came tonight, so thank you. And we are extremely lucky because the people who are in front of you, in front of me now, are very special, I think. And the subject is an important subject. And the fact that we at the Berggruen Institute can, together with the National Academy of Sciences, host this event tonight is really a privilege. So thank you for that. We've just moved to this building, which since the time I spent time in LA was sort of in my imagination. Now, no more. We are here, so we are very grateful to be here. And this building is really about the future. It was the future when it was created. It was the future in movies. It was the future in, it is future again. So, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing that this building sort of symbolizes thinking and living with a city that's changed so many times. The city, as witnessed being here, was incredibly vibrant 100 years ago, downtown. Then the vibrancy went away. It's vibrant again. And I think that's what we're going to learn about tonight, is how cities transform, what makes them special, what makes our connection as humans and cities, you know, sort of humanity. So I won't say more. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And
thank you. So my name's Rick Lovard. I'm the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a program of the National Academy of Sciences. Thank you so much to the Berggruen Institute and to Rachel, our partner, this evening. I also have a few other people I need to thank. I need to thank Stephanie Folsom for recording interviews before this event. Thank you, Stephanie. I need to thank Jesse Hendricks for writing coverage, Arvin David for tweeting on our behalf, and Sachi Gerben for working very hard, as well as the whole Berggruen staff here. We really appreciate it. As an NAS employee, standing in front of a bunch of non-NAS employees, it's my sworn duty to inform you what the institution actually is. So forgive me for that. National Academy of Sciences is a 150-year-old honorific institution, one of the most prestigious in the world. Our executive charter was signed by Abraham Lincoln, which makes us sound like we're part of the federal government. We stand outside the federal government to give good, peer-reviewed science advice to the nation, which sometimes can be more important than others. Our committee reports, we put out a committee report every single day through the National Research Council that is the equivalent of a dissertation in size. And it can range on subjects from the dietary needs of farm animals all the way through to high-risk abortions. So it can be really any topic. About 10 years ago, we started this program, the Science and Entertainment Exchange, as an outreach program to Hollywood. Our literal phone number is 844-NEED-SCI. It's for real. If you dial that number, I know. If you dial that number, someone on staff at the Exchange, if you're writing a screenplay, if you're involved in a TV show, if you're writing a video game, if you're writing a novel, someone on staff will connect you with a scientist who hopefully knows what they're talking about. We've done that over 2,300 times since we opened our doors. We've done, between our partners events and our individual events, which a lot of you, I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd tonight, we've done over 250 of those. We've consulted on films like Avengers Forever War, Black Panther, Blade Runner, A Wrinkle in Time. I need to thank, I saw two board members in the audience tonight, Alex McDowell, Paul Weiss, and Janet Zucker. So that's 3 board members tonight. Let's see, we've got Retreat alumni in the audience. I saw Sandy Smolin, I saw Karen Fitzgerald. These are all people who, if you have questions about our program, there are surrogates, as well as JPL's Tracy Drain, who's back there. Finally, I need to thank Google, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Downey Career Pathways, Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, HHMI, Walt Disney Company, and Science Sandbox, which is an initiative of the Simons Foundation. And so tonight we're going to be, for those of you who have been to exchange events in the past, it's a much more free-form conversation. We're going to have a chance for Q&A. It's my understanding that the bar will be open after the Q&A, so please stay, mix and mingle, ask people questions. This is really about community building. And I need to also, my biggest thank you of the evening goes to Lisa Joy, our moderator, our fearless moderator, I might add. She's an Asian American screenwriter and executive producer. She is a co-creator and executive producer of one of my favorite shows, HBO's Westworld. Right? And her work includes screenwriting for series such as Burn Notice, which she also served on as a co-producer. She was Golden Globe nominated for Pushing Daisies, which earned her a Writers Guild nomination. And for those of you who don't know, because you've been living under a rock, Westworld is a science fiction Western thriller television series created and produced by Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy at Kilter Films. And along with the second season of Westworld, Joy has several highly anticipated film projects in the works, including a film adaptation of Battlestar Galactica. Yes. And so with that, I'm going to have Rachel from Berggruen Institute introduce the other panels tonight, and then we'll get it started.
Thanks, Rick. So our lineup this evening, thanks again for everyone attending. If shameless plug here for our Berggruen Prize, our call for nominations portal is open, so please nominate your thinker now. You can hop online at berggruen.org. This evening we have Jingfang Hao. She has a background in astrophysics and economics. She is a visiting scholar at Harvard Kennedy School, is a very productive writer, having published six books in the past 10 years. Her story, Folding Beijing, won the HUGO Award for Sci-Fi Novelette in 2016. Hannah Landecker will be part of our new crop of Berggruen Fellows working within the framework of our Transformation of the Human program. She starts in the fall. She is also the director of the UCLA Institute of Society and Genetics. She's a sociology professor, historian, sociologist of science, and the author of Culturing Life, How Cells Became Technologies, which won the Suzanne J. Levinson Prize for the best book in history of the life sciences. Hannah has authored many articles on the history of cell biology, and pertinent to this audience here tonight, those topics range from the development of time-lapse microcinematography to the tale of chemically defined media in the 20th century. Craig Hodgetts and Ming are known for their imaginative weave of technology and storytelling to produce an architecture that embraces contemporary ideology, information culture, and evolving lifestyles. They have influenced many generations of thinkers and architects here in Los Angeles, so we're so happy to have them here. Their portfolio includes the incredible Wild Beast Pavilion at Cal Arts, the renovation of the historic Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, a very sensitive reimagining of the Hollywood Bowl, and the Lautner-esque paleontology laboratory at LA's Natural History Museum. Their designs also include a prefab modular classroom prototype for LAUSD and a prefab concept for housing called Link. You may have also experienced their exhibition designs at LACMA, most recently for part of the Pacific Standard Time Initiative. Individually, Ming Fung is the longtime head of design faculty at SciArc. She brings an acute sense of cultural relevance to her studio work. Her comprehension of human experience in various urban environments adds in unique insight to her designs, facilitating accessibility without compromising intellectual integrity. As a longtime professor at UCLA, Craig currently leads Hyperloop Studio based on Elon Musk's revolutionary high-speed pneumatic tube transit system. Craig and about 25 graduate students are charged with addressing urban design, planning, and capsule design for the project. He also has an extensive background in automotive design and theatrical production. And I believe it wholly influences his design aesthetic. So thank you for joining us.
All right, here we go. So everyone can hear me. So I've never moderated before, so if this goes badly, we'll blame inexperience. But I had to jump on board when I heard the panelists and the topic for tonight's discussion, and in this location too. You know, I mean, I think it's somewhat poetically beautiful that 36 years ago Ridley Scott came out with a film that envisioned the future. I think it was 2019, which would be now next year. A future with, you know, flying cars and holographic billboards and sentient kind of, I was going to call them hosts, but that's Westworld, replicants wandering around. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to ask in terms of, you know, the architecture and the landscape of the future. Now let's think about 30 years from now, from today. What do you, and I'll start with, I guess you, Craig and Ming, think that the major technological drivers will be for change?
The major technological drivers.
Typological.
I think it's always psychological drivers. I think it's what people respond to. I think it's what makes life more convenient, more fulfilling, provides all of us with more options, more mobility. And I'm not talking about physical mobility so much as intellectual mobility. Oh my goodness. I think that technology follows those aspects.
I think the city of the future is not that much different from what we see now. I think that physical structure are very difficult, it's immobile. And I also think that people are very fond and have a certain memory and nostalgia towards, you know, building that they are familiar with. What is going to change is the way we behave in a city in terms of efficiency, in terms of being able to control where we want to go and how do we want to do that. So everything is going to have this kind of warp time speed in terms of being able to do anything and make certain decisions. But the physicality of it is going to be a mixed batch. And it's interesting because when you look at like all of the science fiction, and even like in your, you know, in your novella, it's always like the imagery of the city is always something that we're familiar with. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not going to, it's going to be really hard to budget. And as architect, I wish we could move a little bit faster than that.
Yeah, I do agree with the idea that perhaps the physical appearance of city won't change that much as appear in movies and theaters, because people, they do have a lot of emotions in the existing building. So if you just tell them, oh, we are going to destroy this building and just build another fancy one, they perhaps don't think it's a good idea. I've just read the story how New Yorkers destroyed the Pennsylvania station, and after several decades, they regret, they hope to rebuild it again. So maybe still, maybe 100 years later, we still keep a lot of buildings today as traditional historical buildings. But I do think that perhaps the future city will have some significant changes. Just as Professor Fung says, we will hope the city to be more efficient. We can control where we go, how we go there, and the energy efficiency and traffic efficiency. And then that requires data and data collection and some monitoring and some plans into it. Then it requires that all the architectures in the city should be related to some data monitoring systems, and then some kind of artificial intelligence to organize this, to monitoring the traffic flows, the energy flows, the human flows, and everything like this. So to me, it more like to give the neural system to the city. Although you may not change completely the physical part of the city, then if you give the neural system of the city, and then maybe a brain will form, and all the new neurons will transfer the data and the information to that city brain, and that city brain can try to control all the flows of the city, and then that makes the city a large organism, and this is the huge transformation of people's life, I think.
May I ask here, to what end? You know, in other words, is the end point of such a neural transmission of the city to make more products, to make more money, to have more and more merchandise? Or is it, for instance, in this city, in this building that we're in, was a much more relaxed time. It was a time in which people, human interaction was a much larger portion of people's lives than sitting in traffic. And so the objective of all of these things is what I would love us to talk about as a group. And I would really like to hear from you.
So I think one thing that we can say for sure about the city of the future, let's say in 30 years, and this city, but also other cities, is that it is going to have more people in it. We see it all over the world that more and more of humanity is living in cities. And so many of the things that we struggle with day to day in this city have to do with the numbers of people, and so I think if we're speaking about the end, and everybody might have their own vision of how technology can enhance the organization of life and all of those things, but one very, very important end is to think about what is that city with many more people in it going to look like? Is it also going to have more water? Is it also going to have more ways to be in it? Can we have more people without a closing down of the possibilities of living in the cities that we already love?
I mean, one of the things that your book deals with, and we talked about before, was the development of smart cities, right? And the way in which, even with an infrastructure that is a kind of hardware to the city that might stay the same, right? Because there's a sort of torpor and changing and great revolutions of cities. But this software starts to change as an overlay, which I think feeds into what you're talking about. Like when we start to talk about the way in which we're all individually networked right now, right? Although our hardware, say, as a cell phone, is not incredibly well integrated with our packaging yet. But I think that the way that people are hypothesizing with neural networking and such, it might get more and more integrated until we ourselves are somewhat like hybrids, right? At the same time, the ways in which we move about in our environments are also getting more and more synced up and kind of online. And I started to wonder, even in the case of, let's start with an example of cars, right? So more and more cars are self-driving. Say in a city like LA, where there's so much congestion and so much traffic, when you have a car, a simple technology that starts to get self-driving, what happens to transportation? What happens to the need for, say, parking structures if you can basically rent out your own car, and congestion? Are there technologies that will change some of the things that we take for granted in the landscape today?
Well, I would, being pretty deeply involved with a lot of autonomy and that technology, I've begun to think that it's a bit of an opiate. It's something that does not attack the actual problem. If you imagine, all of the cars that we've all fought our way through getting in for this event tonight as being all autonomous, all crowding onto the freeway, increased density of population and so forth and so on. Is that an improvement? You have to think about how to make it possible for people to spend more time with their families, less time in their car, and so forth and so on. So it seems to me that the root cause of all of this goes back to the illusion that you can travel 50 miles a day to work, or that you want to make that more convenient, rather than attacking the root of that, which has to do with, can't you work closer to home? Or can't you work over your neural network? Can we substitute these wonderful advances in terms of technology for our commute, for our delivery of our products, for all of those things, which are, I think we would all agree, inconveniences?
But on the other hand, if you are able to gather all of the data, then, because smart city right now is not really smart. But I do think that in the future, you could go from point A to point B, and that there would be the data and the information would allow you to go from point A to point B, pick up somebody else to go from point A to point B, and then the next thing you know, you don't need to have 4 cars to go to that destination. So I do think that aspect of constantly, how do we excel ourselves, or how can we make it better to have a more efficient city will happen. Now, I'm much more interested in a city where, because already we are starting to think about augmented reality. It's no longer about, the AI is about the AR. And that means that the individual could actually control what they see and how they can do it. So I'm kind of fascinated by this kind of mass population where we all do the same thing. Everything is being organized and help us to have a quote unquote better life, or not. But then at the same time that we can actually be in control of what we can do. I mean, I think that in the future that is a little bit of a known of how we can get there.
Well, it's an interesting idea that I think one thing when you talk about augmented realities, right, and also virtual realities, and it harkens back to something you said too about wouldn't our quality of life be better if we didn't have to commute, if we could work from home in an AR or VR, or print and manufacture our own things in our own. Wouldn't it change the nature of what the city looked like, of what commerce looked like, right? And I think that's fascinating, but I think, as a writer who spends a lot of time sitting at home in my underpants trying to write by myself, what happens is there is a feeling of ultimately a disillusion of community, right? And if technologies allow you to create, let's call it a mass personalization of reality, right? How does that affect not only investment of actual hardscape and hard design, but even more than that, psychologically, what are the, and on the cellular level, how are you responding to that level of, cloistered and personalized landscaping?
Well, I have to say that the sense of community and of a complex and interesting life comes from getting out of your silo. It comes from escaping from the office environment and into an environment in which there's more diversity immediately available to you, even in a lower density environment like this one. So what I think is coming downstream, and I believe this very strongly, is the dissemination, as you were just referring to, of manufacturing activities, hairdressing, baby care, libraries and so forth and so on being in close proximity to one another, and lifestyles being, in a sense, mixed together, as opposed to being all incorporated in a single thing. And new technologies easily enable us to do that with VR and so forth.
And do you think, Hannah, I'm curious to see, you know, when you think about the biology of these new technologies and the ways in which humans interact in a fabricated reality, do you think there are kind of effects that might have on human biology?
Well, I always like to think about things like architecture as an external landscape that actually manifests inside us in our molecular landscape all the time. Even the light-dark rhythms that we have or don't have because our skies are so polluted with light are manifesting in our biorhythms and our cellular biology. So I like this idea of really not just thinking about space and making sure that people can get to work or not get to work or those kinds of things, but thinking about designing a city where the outside is actually intentionally pointed towards having an inner landscape that is less stressed, less dysregulated, less burdened by various things. And there's lots of research that shows that social interaction is one of the things that makes us live longer, just to put it at the most blunt way, right? And the access to being able to interact socially with people, therefore, can be seen as something that has to be part of a smart city. Like, if we want to think about a smart city, then we should probably think about a city that has more sleep in it. We should think, you know, I am not at all an architect, but I like this vision of a city that has raised running tracks across it. We live in Los Angeles, right? We can be outside. I like the idea of solving some of our issues with technological help, but also designing those things in correspondence to our idea of that environment is actually going to be manifesting it inside us as our biology.
So do you think that as technologies advance, that we have to take sort of prophylactic measures in planning cities to safeguard our own biologies and psychologies? Is that something you all think about when designing and, you know, contemplating the body?
Well, I would like to hand that over to the architects, because I don't design anything. I just think about it.
Microphone.
Mike.
Oh.
Well, you know, I do agree with Hannah in terms of like what we need are social spaces. And we actually had this conversation earlier about how important it is and like what is a new social places in the future. Because, you know, movie theater, library, all of those are going to change. Some of them may become obsolete. But you still see people wanting to be together. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be activities that one can do by oneself. I mean, you know, you can watch a movie by yourself, but there are certain activities that us as human beings needs to express ourselves and needs to have some kind of recognition with some physical warm body besides sex. But and I think that the design of the future city also has to think in terms of what people like to do from a leisure point of view. Mm-hmm. Because if we think about a way of relaxation, relaxation has to do with quiet mind or something extremely loud and violent. And those are the two extremes that I'm kind of, I mean, I can't predict, but I'm struggling between those two, because I do think that the generation of now are bouncing back between the two.
I mean, it's interesting, and this is a question for you, Jingfang, too, where one thing that I've noticed, even in a sort of microcosm, is as you know, I have this smart watch and everything like that, and we seem to hit a kind of critical mass sometimes amongst my friends, where you have all this tech, and then suddenly you just need to shut it down for a while, and what becomes luxurious is silence and a analog world, right? And so, of course, you also need these things for tools in your day-to-day job. And depending on what your day-to-day job is, technology might play an even bigger role. And so one of the things you explored in your brilliant book is the idea of different class levels of society having basically different realities. So when you look into the future of this city, do you see what becomes luxury? And what becomes something for the masses? How does that start to look?
Actually, I always think that technology might be future luxury things, the access to better technology, and the cognitive gap between different group of people might still enlarge in the future, because now we still face a large group of people in the world. They even haven't catch up with the first industrial revolution, but we are already entered the phase of the third, the fourth industrial revolution. So it might be in the future that only a small branch of people who can get access to the more advanced technology, and who use this advanced technology to create even more fancy new technology, and their brains, their bodies got strengthened in that process, while still a large proportion of people are living like hundreds years before. So sometimes I'm pessimistic in the trend, because I already see the trends like this, in this way. And I also hope to respond a little bit to the issues the other professors talked about. The first thing is that I think if there are those automatic cars and automatic other equipment, and then it's inevitable that they are connected to huge networks that try to give digital feedbacks to these automatic cars, because they are all guided by some GPS or some networks. And then these kind of networks connecting everything together, or everybody together, they themselves might evolve to some larger super like personality or something. Perhaps not personality, but the network itself might become more and more smarter, and that kind of super structure can be highly over the local community. Perhaps we human beings, we still love the community life, the local life, we interact with each other together, but this super network, they themselves might evolve some kind of characteristic and calculate things by themselves related to the local community. And what's the purpose for that? What's the endless goal for that brain? I think technological development might form that intellectual network first, without any final goals. You don't know what's its purpose. The purpose arrived later than the network, because at first, when a fish in the ocean evolves the neural networks and the first brain, the brain is not for doing calculus or talking like us today. The brain is just to control the body. And then after the brain has evolved, then the brain and the neural network evolves independently of the body cells. And yeah, so I'm not sure about the future, but I think that kind of intellectual network might happen.
Well, I think that's really fascinating. There's an interesting corollary right now to that, right? Because what you're talking about is basically, the harvesting of data into an AI based on people's geographical moves, right? Understanding where cars go and such, right? So we already have the corollary of that in, say, social network in Facebook, right? Where we start to understand en masse people's, who they hang out with, their likes and dislikes. Now, that's information gleaned only from a profile online. When you start to be able to pair that with physical data, where you like to go for lunch, where you live, what friends you congregate with on what days, you start to get an incredibly holistic portrait of who a person is. One that is potentially susceptible to manipulation. Privacy before it used to be this kind of abstract concept, I think, in America, right? Like, I've got nothing to be ashamed of. Watch, But it does leave you vulnerable to, when your data can be aggregated and examined that way, some manipulation that, as you said, we may not even fully understand, whether that manipulation is caused by an AI or by some kind of regulatory or private company, right? So when we think about the possibility for that kind of scrutiny on physical behavior in the future, do you think that there are perils or considerations we should try to take into account at this phase when planning those cities?
I think, the status that we think we have right now is essentially a construct about 100 years ago. I'm so glad you mentioned the Industrial Revolution, because the idea of a fixed schedule, the idea of commuting, the idea of goods transfer and so forth and so on is really only 100 years old. And the aspect that we are feeling threatened by, and you've just voiced the threat, is in fact a move back towards a kind of village of gossip and balladeers and people who were, by nature of their very small constraints, grouping together and knowing one another's secrets, because they did. And so I think this newfound or newly created interchange of information is actually moving us toward a more normal state as opposed to a disjunctive state. I think it's the way human beings are, and I think the more that's enabled and the more people congregate according to lifestyles, occupations, they're all sports fanatics, so they live in a particular arena, or they know that that's where all the sports people collect, that one begins to collect into, let's say, kind of virtual enclaves in which those sort of proclivities are reinforced, enhanced, and celebrated.
So a sort of siloing of cultures based on self-selection?
I wouldn't say quite siloing, but I would definitely say aggregations of cultures based on self-selection.
And do you think that in cities, reinforcing cloisters of tribal clusters like that, that's a good thing, that amount of self-selection is positive for humans?
I think that's the only problem, since I'm an economist, the only problem is that in nowadays we form a unified economic systems, and the income and the expenditure of people is not determined by the local community, it's determined by the whole society. And then sometimes you cannot just choose the lifestyle you really like, be based in your human nature several thousand years ago. Sometimes it's the economic system force you to do some work you do like, but that's the way you can earn money. money, because only the kind of job follow the technological development that can create maybe higher value. So it's the constant conflict of the within inner self of everybody. Is after the Industrial Revolution, we still hope to have those community life as our human nature tells us, but the economic system follows the technological development and force everybody to follow it to earn money for yourself. So I can feel that conflict, but that conflict might be intensified still further in the future. You can choose whether to follow the technological development or not. But the money will follow the technological development. Right.
So all of these things that you're bringing up, these concerns with that have very much been in the news with, we have access to social networks, but then everybody knows everything about us. It always strikes me that it's super individualizing, that each person has this huge amount of information that somebody knows about them. But in terms of thinking about cities in the future, if that kind of data power could be turned to kind of making visible and making much more material to us all the invisible things which bind us, all the relationships, like turning away from the individuals, each as a million nodes, to the relationships between them, and making some of those fabrics much more visible as the places that are in need of design. That I think would be a nice turn of the current anxiety. And I'm thinking about things as banal as the sewers. There's an interesting project at MIT to put smart technologies underneath people's houses in the sewers, because there is actually this diurnal rhythm to antidepressants and all of the pharmaceuticals that we take. There is a seasonal rhythm to the rise and fall of antibiotic resistance in our sewers. There's all of this life going on there in this infrastructure that connects us all. And just the very fact of making that visible and mapping it makes you re-envision the community of individuals through their interconnectedness. So if we could take the smartness and the power of all of those things and not be obsessed all the time with the tiny little details of every individual life, but instead, thinking about the relationality, the web, and maybe even about the not the humans, but what about the insects and the animals that connect us all? What about the flies that go through lots of people's houses? Can we get away from human single person all the time and just make some more of this kind of fabric of the city and the relationality more visible? I think that would be a really nice kind of turning away from the current obsession with my information and who knows it and my privacy and all of those things.
So that's fascinating. I think soon we'll do Q&A, right? So just before we do that, let's just do a lightning round of, in your future city, the thing that you love and would love to see, because we've gotten two interesting things from you so far. We've got sewers and sleep. But since you got that, you want to throw in one more, and then we'll go down and here we'll make a city together here.
You go first.
Oh,
I just spoke, so.
yes. Well, the question is, in what would I love to keep?
Well, what would you like to see? Just, she wants this sewer system, so you get one thing to add to this city. I like this. I actually think it's very beautiful. I'm not joking about it. It's great.
No, I agree in the sense that, in future city is going to be really a system. City is always about a system of network. We already talk about city as infrastructure and all of that. And I think that if you live in the city, you're part of a whole community, you're part of the city. So individualism is just, you are, but you're not living by yourself. So I do think that for me, what I would like to see is more being able that one can actually be able to be more, have more access to that aspect and not feeling more alien. That's what I would like to see in the future city.
To me, I really hope that we can have those really fast speed intra-city transportation. So I'm very interested, curious in the Hyperloop project. But I believe that's intercity, so make cities more accessible. But within city, I think that as city get larger and larger, and the population is getting larger and larger, it's so difficult for friends within a city to communicate with each other, and it is very difficult for us to really live together in a community. So if there's a super fast intra-city transportation method, and I can meet a friend in other side of the city just in an hour, and we can have a lot of more communications and face-to-face interactions. And I still believe that, I do agree with you that our human nature won't change that much through the all the thousand years of time. So we need those kind of physical interactions with people. So I do hope that we find those kind of super fast transportation ways.
We hypothesized when we were working with the Hyperloop that you could get up in the morning, go to San Francisco, and be back before lunch to meet your lover or whatever, which is a nice idea. What was that movie, The Captain's Paradise? Anybody remember that? You probably don't. Anyway, Alec Guinness. At any rate, the idea of speed is, to my mind, actually a contradiction to the idea of a social fabric. It becomes a panacea, it becomes something that, in spite of a dysfunctional city, that you can somehow repair it with that means. And I hope that we can disengage from the Victorian and Industrial Revolution idea of production as a linear process that's place-centered, that has to do with sort of physical linkages, and move past that into something which is not, is more loosely structured, and is structured in a way allows infinite numbers of pathways. Christopher Alexander, a very famous and important mathematician, taught at the University of California in Berkeley, and said a city is not a tree, it is a semi-lattice. And that was a very, very prescient thing to say in the 1960s. A semi-lattice as a mathematical construct that really allows zipping around as opposed to destination to destination. And I believe we're approaching that point. We just need to kind of recognize it, and I think that's one of the most important and impressive things about where technology is leading us.
Well, maybe we should have a walking track next to the Hyperloop. So that
Well, that sounds good. That sounds good, yeah. It's nice to know that cities may change, but it seems like all of your desires are to design something that allows for community via different ways, and which is pretty fundamental to human nature. So, not nearly as dystopian as I thought we might get, but I'm just used to Westworld.
You just wanted some.
What would I like to be? Ooh. What would would I like for a city? I didn't expect this. I feel like there will be improvements in transportation that they're working on already. I actually do believe in the driverless car phenomenon and the ability to provide rides for lower income people via leasing your car out during the day, sort of like Uber or Lyft when you're not there to drive it. So I think that there will be fewer cars but servicing more people, which I think will be a social good. I think that there will be less pollution because we'll be harnessing new forms of energy, which I think is also interesting. I do think that there will be more individuality in terms of working from home, and my parents have a mom and pop business that got put out by Walmart. There's a chance, I think, to get something bespoke and smaller and to service those communities again with a community that has a kind of lattice structure like that. And honestly, I never wanted anyone to monitor my poop before, but I'm down with it if it makes everyone feel good. And I think, yeah, walkways, outside, beautiful, I don't know. I'm basically just agreeing with all the panelists. And no AI apocalypse. That would be good for me.
I just have to say one thing, because as a media person and a producer, you guys have the bully pulpit.
Yeah.
You do. I mean, your vision, whatever that is really a determinant of where everybody goes.
It's not going that well, season 2.
You're going to need a mic. Yeah.
Can I
It's like we can
ask a
share.
question?
Excuse me.
Okay, I'd like to follow right up on that. I work in the city government in a small city just to the west of here called Culver City. And we have some terrific advantages to the metropolis of LA in that we're very much part of that metropolis, but we're small enough that we can kind of at least attempt to shape and determine our future. And we're in the process, as Craig and Ming know well, right now of working on that. And we have lots of stuff going for us, but we have lots of challenges. We don't have enough housing, and we certainly don't have enough affordable housing. We have an incredibly diverse city. Last year, we were named the 4th most diverse school district in the country. But the Range Rover quotient at our kindergartens is rising quickly, and we're very wary about losing that diversity and experiencing displacement. Our homeless population has gone up radically, as it has everywhere here in the Southland. So I want to sort of challenge you guys along the same lines. We're imagining our city in a process over the next 3 or 4 years of what it's going to be for the next 25 to 50 years. What should be our 3 priorities? And we have Elon Musk at our doorstep with wanting to install the loop dig tunnels under our city. We have lots of film and television. How as a city government, do we guide and imagine that? What should be our 3 priorities?
I can do 3 real quick, but just mine would be transportation, affordable housing, and education, public school systems. One of the things that I do miss in the kind of what I feel like is the kind of self-selecting silos that occur in society is I think you miss that cross-pollination, and you weed out a lot of voices, and important talents that way.
That's a hot potato. I don't know how to respond to this moment.
Yeah, actually, you really remind me of the aspect of public services and education. We did not talk about that a lot in today's conversation, but that's really important for me. The only thing, I'd really like to give advice is perhaps more community, more spaces for children and for them to communicate with the whole community and to be safe. Because now I think the city is not safe for children anymore. No parent can just let the children to go out to play. Everything is dangerous. The people, the cars, everything is dangerous. So the parent has to go everywhere with them and drive a long distance to a small little park to play. But it's not used to like that in before. Children are educated in community 200 years ago, and for thousands of years it's like this. So, and then the community can take care of those, a lot of education and other, they take care of the elderly person, they take care of the children, but now we can not do this. It's not, the city itself is not safe for children and elderly person. So I do hope that there will be some like more common areas for communications between among the community, and then we can help each other and for education and other things, and these kind of atmosphere really help the whole community to develop, I think. But I know that's quite difficult within the urbanization design these days, but that's very important for the next generation. Of course, the public system is also very important. I myself doing some educational program in China, and I really do know how important it is for especially a community with diversified population and some poor population. Education is really the most important thing.
So 25 years from now, you have to consider density. So you ask, do we need more housing? Of course. Do we need better transportation? Of course. Do we need to replan? Do we need to rezone? Do we need to think about the city very, very differently from what it is right now? Because knowing Culver City is very, very low density. And the community in basically, in America is always, it's like not in my backyard mentality. That is never going to solve the problem if you have to think about future city. So that would be my first step, is to think 25 years from now, you need to think about the population, and the people who are making the decision are not making the decision quite yet.
I keep thinking of the commissioner's plan for New York City, which was of, scattered farmhouses and a very hilly terrain. And they made up their mind to build this grid. I'm not a fan of the grid, but I am a fan of what they did. They simply ran trenches along the grid throughout the city, leaving farmhouses poised on the top of hills and having to build temporary stairs down to the road because they really believed in this idea of the grid. Or Baron von Haussmann, when he raised the radio plan in Paris, took no prisoners, just did it. And I think, as Ming is saying, we're very much constrained now by a political system which is overly sensitive to today's issues and not looking at the next century. And the will to do that is, what needs to be, we need to discover the will to do those things. Otherwise, we have a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid. And it's important.
Well, I'm not sure you want the sociologist of science to design your city, but maybe I can plug for science, right? And to just be open to, I understand you're working under enormous constraints, but I think that we're learning a lot about what makes for happier, healthier bodies, even in high density, right? And maybe there are some really, really simple things like the incorporation of walkability in ways that were not available to us to think about 30 years ago, or like where the green is. Even if you have more people, how are you gonna make it so that all the kids who live there always can look out the window and see something green? Like we know that going outside and looking in the far distance helps kids not become myopic. So there's just some really kind of basic things there, I think, that turning to some of the research on these things can inform those decisions, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive with keeping all the people out and just for the rich.
Great. It's really comforting to hear that all the panelists, including the moderators, still very community-oriented. So anyway, my question is actually about the identity of people vis-a-vis the cities. With the technological advancement and also the sort of disparity in terms of the access to technology in the future, what do you guys think that will happen to people's identity vis-a-vis the cities? Now, you know, we have New Yorkers and Beijingers or Shanghainese, or I don't even know if there's a word like LAers or whatever. What's going to happen to that sense of identity? Are we going to be, you know, like using Hao Jingfang's framework? Are we going to be more like first spacer, second spacer, or third spacer kind of identity? So I'd like to hear comments from all of you, including the moderator. Thanks.
I'm not going first this time.
I think you may have the best answer.
Well, I think that it's not even just a sense of identity, like I identify as a LA resident or a you know, this is my city, I have some kind of loyalty to it. But I do, to repeat myself, really think that we manifest the environments that we live in biologically and through our bodies and those kinds of things. So it's not even just a sense of connectedness or identity with a city, but some very fundamental and below the level of consciousness. Like, do you feel at home here? Are you comfortable? I think that I do a lot of research on stress and the sort of stress as the intersection between biology and society, right? And if you have a city full of people who don't feel ever at home or at rest or feel out of sync with their own bodies in some way, that's a very different way of being an inhabitant of a place than another. So that's the way I think about it. That's perhaps not the way you were asking the question, but that's how I think about it.
Something you said just resonated with me also vis-a-vis your question before of you know, we all define ourselves in many different ways, right? I was introduced as an Asian American panelist, but there's many other ways to introduce me too, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, sure, but you could also say like a nerd from New Jersey, or, you know, somebody who, you know, had this many boyfriends. Like, there's many ways to kind of, you know, characterize a person. And I think sometimes taking ownership and feeling involved in community, the one thing that I miss, and I think we talked a little bit about a return, like there's something about people that I think wants to feel tribal. It's the cause of great loveliness in humanity and great evil. We love our tribes. Tribes are always defined by an in-group and by necessity an out-group. But one of the interesting things about community and that I hadn't really thought of before was you start to feel a member of a community when you actually help to clean that shit up. Like at home with my kids, I'm like, you do the dishes, because we're all doing this together, you know. And something that we were talking about in even our production company is like, we need to get out and like not just donate money to the community, but go and like make some food, clean up some stuff on the street, and work together with the other members of your community who are not like you necessarily, who are based simply on geography in this location, and forge a bond literally by being in a physical reality together, and then reinforcing that nature of self-defining as this is my community, these are my people, simply by time spent.
Well, we've managed somehow, though, to move people out of their nests to disparate places where they work, and limited the amount of time they can spend in their nest as well, working with their neighbors and so forth and so on. And that has something to do with why my personal conviction is that we need to stop thinking of cities as organisms in which people travel long, long distances. We need to give people more time in their nest, more time to, in fact, relate to the people around them, and for their children to relate to the children around them, and so forth and so on. And so I think when I first asked about, what is the utility of advancing technology, I think it has to have a purpose. And that purpose, I think, should attempt to restructure the way we relate to one another and to our communities, and not to enhance the ability to be dispersed. That's my own private conviction.
To me, I think the identity problem always related to the mobility of people. So if the more people mobile among places to places, the more ambiguous his or her identity will be. So if you just live in a local community for the whole your life, for 30 or 40 years, and you know everybody around you in a local community, and the identity problem will never be a thing for you. You know who you are since you're born and until you're dead. But if you just come out of the community and you live in this city for 2 years, another city for 2 years, you do this thing for 3 years, and then you change. If you change a lot and mobile a lot, and then that question always raised. So the problem of identity crisis is always related to the larger and larger labor mobility in the modern world. And I do think that in the future, unless the globalization process is held down by some violence or the labor mobility will still in an increasing trend, and people are still kind of mobile everywhere in the world. And then some people got their identity in the professional community, like investment banker. They sometimes work in New York, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, or in other financial centers, and they don't care which city they are living. They know they are the investment bankers, so they always contact with a small circle of people whenever city they are. And academic is another circle. So professors will find themselves meet the same bunch of people in Hawaii, in San Francisco, in other places, in the academic conferences, and also some others like coding community, people who own Bitcoin. They will find themselves the identity more in that professional community rather than a locality. So they, especially for the young people, I've seen a lot of people don't consider themselves as any citizen related to that, related to that particular city, because they move a lot among different cities. And also, but that's only is some solutions for these people. There are a lot of other people really feel lost in those big cities, especially now in China, in Beijing and Shanghai. A lot of people, they are originated from small towns, from small cities, and they are just get their roots out of their own community and get into these big cities, and they cannot find themselves and they feel really lost. So that's a lot of psychological problems happen, but they really do not have any method because they cannot find the proper jobs in their own local community. So that becomes more and more psycho crisis in big cities now in China.
So, I mean, I really do agree with you, because I always tell everybody that architects we are like a big family. You know, wherever we go, we can call on another fellow architect and visit their office, even though we may not know them, and they open the door. It's a big family. So yes, you have identity with. You know, as you know, if you are in a profession or an academic. And I think that we are very used to think now that, like, especially in the United States, it's much more of a transient country than in most. I mean, everybody who moves to LA came from another place. And so the identity has to do with a community of people that you share interests with, not a physical place. You could be living in an apartment complex, and it's great because you teach your children to do that, but a lot of people who live in the same apartment building don't share anything in common with the neighbor. They don't even know the neighbor's name. But they have a community of friends or people who have the same hobbies or who go out and play poker or whatever. So you identify yourself because you identify yourself with the quality or the aspiration or the like or dislike that you have with somebody else. And I think more and more, especially now with the technology, I mean, you know, you can play games and then you say, would you like to play a game with a friend, which is a virtual friend? And that's kind of part of a certain community that you may not know or see and understand or ever met that virtual friend, but you kind of feel like you're part of that community. So I think that is a really like broad way of thinking about it, but you can have your own identity by going through all of that.
Great. Well, I think that basically sums it up for this right now. You've all drank before this too, so this must be getting late for you. But I think there's more drinking now. Thank you so much to my wonderful